Welcome to the Organic Filaments Network. I'm your host, Sher Ali Khan, and today we're speaking with Mekaal Hassan on a major shift in his career his and and his moves beyond performance into preservation, evolution, and cultural archiving. Last year, Mekaal Hassan launched a Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan tribute tour, marking a new chapter post Andola. This phase isn't just about revisiting the past; it's about evolution. With the new lineup and expanded sound, he is deepening his commitment to archiving Pakistani music, poetry, and philosophy. His collaboration with the Aga Khan Museum reflects this shift, alongside the Revayat project, which aims to preserve traditional sounds and amplify grassroots voices through a dedicated album and performance series. For those ready for an in-depth look at this new direction, please like, subscribe, and share. Let's jump in. How are you doing, Mekaal?
I'm doing
I'm doing
okay, man.
okay,
How are
man. How
you?
are you? I'm doing great. I mean, I've been looking forward to this interview and just looking at, this sort of, I wouldn't say like transition point, but I think it's, a different phase in your career,
Yeah.
moving towards Qawwali, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan tribute tours. Uh, would you would you describe this as a natural continuation of your past work, or does it signal a more deliberate shift?
It
Well, it
it's
it's
actually
actually
both
both.
because way back in 2012, I was asked by the Aga Khan Institute in Delhi to they basically commissioned the first 10 kalams that Amir Khusro had composed, which is Mankunto Mola, Tap Tilak, all of those classics, right? And they said, well, we want you to sort of like come up with your kind of like interpretation of these. So at that point, I kind of like set about doing arrangements for those very traditional qawwalis. And that was with Javed singing. And this is way back in 2012. So that was my first sort of like foray into dealing with qawwali. And then many, many years later, like almost a decade later, around about COVID time, which is when I wanted to sort of like start. When COVID hit, I wanted to sort of like preserve and record traditional music around Lahore, which is my home city, as you know. And I started on the quest of like finding the most outstanding people who were invested in traditional music. And so that started that series. And the first person to record on that is the person that I'm currently doing the Nusrat tribute with, which is Sher Ali Khan. So it was kind of like this natural shift where I had some experience with working with Qawwali, and then I started this traditional music series, and that introduced me to Shazad, and then that association led to this idea. Once I was in Canada and working with the Aga Khan Museum, basically posited the question that like because that museum is a tremendous museum of Islamic art, and it's got like art, music, and stuff from all over the Islamic world. And I basically wanted to contribute something which was very Pakistani. And I asked them that, would they be open to sort of like us doing a commemorative sort of like tribute to Nusrat, where we would redo the 1996 Night Song record, which is ostensibly Nusrat's last record with Real World Records. And the guy who produced that particular album was a Canadian producer, Michael Brook. So it was really his production style, which sort of like made that record sound so unique. So I kind of like wanted to carry on from that and bring in my sort of like style and sound to songs that were done on Night Song, and that's what started the whole thing. And the Aga Khan Museum and Amir Ali, who's the director of programming, they were really supportive. We sort of like I went back and I worked for like almost a year on just putting everything together, and then we brought the program back out. In fact, we're going to try and do it again, if not this year, then the coming year, and maybe bring it to the US as well. And so that's what started the idea. And then I also did a documentary feature on the impact of that record on musicians generally and what it meant to people in Pakistan. So that documentary was also sort of like accomplished, and the Aga Khan is supposed to add on uh, bits and pieces from their side, which is primarily going to be, I think, interviews with the Canadian people who worked on that project with us. So yeah, so that's how the whole idea started. Yeah, it took a while to develop, but I think I had the right people to do it with.
Yeah, I think that right, that makes sense. I mean, uh, I think what is interesting on a musical level about this transition is you've always been engaged in like more like rock based classical music,
Yeah,
and you know the Nusrat, sort of revisiting Nusrat, who's an interesting figure if you look at not just subcontinental music but also just like Pakistani music, because we have like icons like Mehdi Hassan and all these people who were associated with like Radio Pakistan, and you know, I think like it's just you know, from a musical perspective, what do you see as a fundamental difference between those forms of music, especially in how they function in performance and those things?
sure. Well, Mehdi Saab was primarily a ghazal singer, right? And so that's romantic poetry. And what Nusrat really brought to the Qawwali tradition was he contemporized Qawwali in the sense that it moved away from just being about, you know, just spiritual content, and it became more contemporary and more sort of like, it was much more sort of like immediate, and the subject matter was also sort of like, it diversified it. And I think that's one of the reasons why so much of his appeal was felt in India and in Bollywood. And it also then reached out beyond that into the UK with Peter Gabriel taking an interest in what he was doing. And it wasn't just the lyrical content, it was also the his vocal style and his presence, and like his he was a tremendous improviser. And I think the Qawwali medium really lends itself well to sort of like group participation. So like, unlike classical traditions, which are sort of like, where the artist is performing and you're just sitting there passively receiving receiving the improvisation and basically being pulled into this performance space. With Qawwali, it's very much like there's a back and forth thing where the Qawwal will say a line or say a couplet which really resonates with people, and then sort of like he improvises upon that. And now none of that is planned. It just happens based on reaction from the crowd. So there's much more of an immediacy and a back and forth dialogue between the audience and the performers. And also Qawwali, to me, I said this in another interview as well. It's sort of like, for me, it's like the Muslim version of gospel music, where it's got religious roots, but it's also contemporary in the sense that it talks about subject matters which are not just only religious. It's not just about religious personalities. It's not just about religious figures or religious events. It's also about very colloquial things that are happening in people's lives, like, traditions, culture, how they live, situations that have happened. So all of those are stories within the Qawwali tradition, which you'll find. A lot of them are.
One of the first recording studios, I believe, where he used to record was Waves Studio, right, in Lahore. And Waves was a Catholic studio of sorts
Yeah,
because there
yeah,
wasn't infrastructure at that time. And it's kind
yeah.
of interesting, like how he sort of connected. He's also saying gospel, I think, in Punjabi, you know, which is a,
He did, yeah, yeah, he probably did. So, I mean, all of these things sort of like really led him to be a figure who had like a very sort of like broad impact because of all these reasons. And of course, he also did all the Amir Khusro known written songs like Chap Tilak and Ziale Miski and all of those. There's all of that too. But one thing that kind of like marks him from many other Qawwali artists is that he was a very good composer. So he wrote a lot of the songs which have become classics now, right? So Kali Kali Zulfon se leke to, Dam Mast and all those songs, he composed those songs. He came up with those melodies. And so that is the difference from a lot of the Qawwals that I even hear now, who now just sing Nusrat. Basically, they're only singing his songs, but they're not writing their own stuff. Or if they are writing their own stuff, it's not that well known. So he kind of like broke that mold and really sort of like supercharged the tradition of Qawwali to bring it into a more modern era, to bring it into a more contemporary era, and to also make it accessible to other musical styles. It wasn't just that it was just Qawwali. He was willing to sort of like go and work with other kinds of styles and other kinds of aesthetics. So that aspect of his personality and the fact that he was willing to take his music out of Pakistan and work with people outside of Pakistan, that really impacted the way everything was perceived.
That's really interesting. And I think like we've seen many bands and artists attempt to cover Nusrat and often, like but it's not done with like, the treatment that I see that you were trying to aim for in the Aga Khan project. I think like there's this element of, like, we have to preserve this artist and the essence of what he presents in terms of sound and music.
Yeah, I think part of that is again, you see, going back to who's in your team, who's sort of like who are the people you're working with. Now, if you're trying to do a Nusrat tribute, it immediately makes sense to have an excellent Qawwali group as the centerpiece of that idea. It doesn't really make sense. I know there's a lot of pop artists who do a lot of Nusrat songs in their shows. It's like sort of like this standard treatment where they will people who are not Qawwali artists are doing Nusrat songs and sort of like obviously trying to do it in their style. And I think that that's fine, but I wanted to do it in a way where it would be authentic, that someone who enjoys Qawwali and has heard Night Song and loves Nusrat would be very pleased or would be very appreciative of what we were trying to do. So without taking away from the spirit of what Nusrat himself was all about, that's what my intent was, that it should sound like this is how it should have been done. And it should sound authentic, yet at the same time, it should have this contemporary edge to it. So those are the kind of things I was aiming for. And also to kind of like keep Michael Brooks's ambient aesthetic in there as well. So that when you listen to it, you're like, yeah, this sounds like something from Night Song, but it sounds something that Mekaal or someone like him would also do. So just trying to balance all those aesthetic things and stylistic works, just trying to make it work that way.
So you also did you engage with some of the unreleased material that they had or anything like that? Or no?
No, I didn't actually. We pretty much focused on the five sort of full length songs that are Night Song. And in some cases, we added on verses where, like on the record, Nusrat sort of like sung maybe one, like a chorus line, and then that's it. There's no follow up verse section. So Shahzad ended up composing verses for some of the songs. And in fact, I should share all of the audio so that you can actually hear what we added on. And the challenge again was to make it sound like something that Nusrat would have come up with, and not to make it sound like something that, you know, well, he did this, but now we've added on this. So seem, it should be seamless. That was the intent. And so in fact, once we get off this thing, I'll send you the songs, and I think you'll have a hard time picking out where Nusrat kind of like finishes and where Shahzad's thing comes in. So so that was the intent as well, to kind of like, add on a bit of what we sort of like, because those songs, like there's certain tracks on Night Song where it's just one melodic portion, one verse or one chorus, and nothing after that. Now, if you're going to make a full length performance out of that, you need more sections to it. So there were cases where we added on stuff, keeping the spirit of the original in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, that brings me to your Riwayat project. I think it's like kind of a different project, but it also holds like a lot of personal value for you in terms of your own growth and evolution as a musician, I would say, right? Like,
Yeah,
what was
yeah.
the vision behind that what why go down that route? Like I know that Pakistan and South Asian music has a very like certain trajectory that it pushes artists through. I felt like this was one of your other efforts to contribute back, you know.
Yeah, well, the effort was really, over the last 15 years or so, we've had a very popular music program which has been very dominant and done a lot of good to the image of Pakistan, and brought in many wonderful artists. But I kind of felt that it was getting skewed more and more towards a pop music aesthetic. And I wanted to sort of like go back and capture things the way they were done old school, back in the 50s and 60s, where everybody would be in the room. It would be one take, live performance. You know, that's the aesthetic we were going for. And to preserve it in its truest sort of like form as possible, not have like, technical trickery to improve it. It is what it is, and you sort of like record it the best way possible. So there was that. Then there was also, I was concerned that so much of this music is going uh, unrecorded, and these families have invested for generations into this craft. So there was that, preserve that as well. That was an effort that I wanted to make. Just a second, I'm just gonna.
You've also been working with the Aga Khan Museum. You mentioned that earlier. What sparked that collaboration? And like, normally you don't see like uh people going in that route where like they start to get into that sort of realm of like preservation and like working with like institutions like that.
What sparked it was just the director of programs, Amir Ali, also loves history and all kinds of styles of music. They have tons of different styles come through. Everything from like spoken word performances to flamenco performances to people coming in from Morocco, Spain, all over. And so yeah, he has a very sort of like wide appreciation for the arts. And it just occurred to me that most of the Pakistani stuff that ends up in Canada is normally pop oriented artists, not your traditional people so much. Sorry, Fareed Ayaz and Abu Muhammad have performed quite a lot in Canada and in the States. But other than those two guys, you don't get to experience much more. So I kind of like wanted to bring in this idea that we have, because Shazad was relatively not a very known artist because he lives out in Shadra. Uh, he really doesn't have any releases as such, you know. So he's ostensibly a new artist. Of course, he's been singing for a long time, but people don't know of him. But hopefully that will change now. So that was the idea that, rather than just keep on flogging the classical thing that I had done in 2023 with them, with the Toronto based lineup, we would change the entire repertoire, come in with a completely new set of songs and a whole new range of material. Again, that's something that not typically a lot of artists do. They have like this one thing that they do and they keep kind of like touring that. But I wanted to have like a wider range.
So what's like Shazad's background in terms of like, like where did he learn music, or has his family been in music for
Yeah.
quite? Yeah.
His dad is Muhammad Bhuta Kawal, and he basically learned from his father, and it's been in his family for about a good 40, 50 years. His son also sings with him. So it's like a very much a family tradition. His nephew's also singing with him. So it's very much a family tradition with these guys. But a lot of Qawwali artists in Pakistan, as I'm sure you know, and it's really finding not just the right voice, but also the right guys that you can travel with and sort of like work with. And, there's so much of rehearsals and also finding traditional guys who are willing to sort of like learn about how songs are set up in terms of structure. Because when they're doing Qawwali, it's pretty much they're singing open, right? Things are not set out in like, okay, when this happens, then you do this, right? You go to this section. I mean, they'll have cues, but those will be like real time, completely unrehearsed. But when you put a Qawwali into sort of like a song structure, where there's an intro and a lead in, and then there's a verse, and then, there's next, everything is more coordinated.
Yeah.
So you have to find the right traditional people who understand those changes and who can also be flexible enough to understand how cues work and how sections work. And it takes a little time. And that's why you have to rehearse it so much so it becomes smooth and seamless.
So when you look at the broader trajectory of the band itself, you've had different, like, really amazing sort of lead vocalist sort of situations, whether it was Javed Bashir or the early work, like, and I want to know, like, in your mind, like, what goes into, like, trying to create the best sort of situation to play music the way you want in terms of Mekaal Hassan band.
Well, I mean, the stuff that we were doing with Javed was actually so suited to his vocal style and his skill. And I think it would have been, and it was, hard to find people after him who could bring that kind of, authenticity and that kind of power to it. That was the challenge. So I, for my part, kept trying to find people who could do it. But honestly speaking, when you've made something where it's like everybody gets used to that sound and that lineup, especially with vocals, it's a bit of it's always a challenge to kind of reinvent that with someone else. And it's unfair to the other person because they might be an excellent singer, but it could be that because people have heard it in someone else's voice, they'll always respond better to that. And it's not a matter of the new guy not having the skill or not having the talent. It's just the way people are used to doing it. So for me, doing this Nusrat thing is also really much needed change because I was getting really fed up of trying and retrying different vocal textures, different vocalists, and it's a lot of rehearsals. And music wise, this music is a lot more immediate and I think a lot more accessible than the classical thing we were doing, which was a lot more involved, a lot more technical, required singers and musicians who had a certain ability. Otherwise, you would really struggle with it. This one is more down home. It's more sort of like groove oriented. It still requires skill, but the aesthetic's slightly different because it's not classical based. The melodies are simpler. It's not that complicated for people to sing along to because the
Yeah.
melodies are much more hummable and Nusrat's compositions are very catchy. So, it's got a lot of those positives. And this is partly why Qawwali is so popular as well, as opposed to classical music, because people can understand it and sort of like, imagine it and hear it back and sing along with it, which they always like doing, you know. So I think that's one of the reasons that there's an immediacy there, which with classical music, like I said before, you're more like as you're there as a passive sort of like a recipient of what's happening. And with Qawwali, you can actually sing along with it and sort of like get involved with it. And there's a back and forth. So
Yeah.
there's much more of that sort of like call and response thing that you have with blues or with gospel. You've got that in Qawwali. And it's the only Desi art form that I know of which has that.
Yeah,
All the
absolutely.
other all the other styles, Thumri, Ghazal, classical, they don't have a call and response medium with the audience, but this one
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, it's just amazing to see your energy about this. Like, because I think, like, musically, like, you've always put your all into your music and you're very passionate about it. But I think, like, it's just this, like, jump in your voice when you're speaking about this project that comes across.
I mean, it's really fresh. It's fresh right now. So everybody is like enjoying it because, I mean, we've done the classical thing for so long and we weren't exactly getting anywhere with it in terms of
It was
what I
also
could hope
very
for.
it was also very like technical. You were pulling
Yes,
off like various traditions and like jazz itself, is a very
yeah,
complex sort of
yeah,
musical genre. Like you have to be listening to it for a long time. Um,
exactly. I mean, you have to have the. I mean, I'm not saying that it wasn't great to do, but it was great with certain configurations. And we had the best of that earlier on in our career, like in the first 7 or 10 years was the peak of the band. And then after that, we were just trying to match up with what we had done before. And I think the good thing is that I was aware of this, that I needed to make a shift. And in fact, when Humera Channa was singing with us, we actually started doing more folk oriented songs because that was her forte. And she was a great singer. Like she was so good. And so with her, we were suddenly, doing more Sindhi folk tunes and doing more sort of like stuff that was not really hardcore classical at all. And that kind of like led to also now this Qawwali thing. It's all music. At the end of the day, it's all music and songs. And it's like I said, it's about finding the right people to run with. Because you can have a great singer, but you can not have the right songs for that person. Or you can have great songs, as is what happened with us. You can have the songs, you can have the amazing musicianship, but maybe not have the best suited voice for that particular thing. And that doesn't mean that the voice is not great. It just means for that particular aesthetic or particular requirement, it's not the best fit, even though it might be fine on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. So how has this like impacted your live performances? What has the response been in terms of your live performances? I know that last year you performed in Karachi after like 7 years, I think, right?
Yes, yes. We've had just fantastic audiences. Way better response to this Qawwali set that we're doing, much more enthusiastic and much more sort of like people are like really loving it because I think nobody expected me to do this. But you kind of like get typecast as, oh, they only do this classical thing. But now that we're doing this, in fact, we recorded the live show we did in Lahore and we're supposed to release it at some point. You can see the audience response. And we just did this show in Karachi and it was full house, like 800 people, absolutely like spellbound, and then like standing ovation and like like really like the audience was at some points you kind of think that are they enjoying it or are they just like kind of like just taking it all in and sort of like just going along with it. And sometimes you catch yourself thinking that same thing happened in Toronto. We essentially ended up selling out the first show and then they added on a second show right after the first show and that also sold out. So clearly, Nusrat's music and his legacy, and then of course the people who like what we do. It's a good combo.
Yeah, at one point, I think like the band went through this very weird transition phase where you were performing with like different lineups essentially in different
Yeah,
places.
yeah,
And I thought there was a lot of promise with the lineup you were using in India.
yeah. But you know what happened there when the politics of the whole thing? What we never accounted for was that we just thought like, oh, we just want to play great music and bring our music to our friends in India and play it with them, and
Because
that
they
was
have a
what
lot
we
of
didn't like.
venues too, right? They have a lot of venues out there too, right? And
Yeah, no, India fantastic in terms of growth possibilities and appreciative audiences. Just, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like in Pakistan, we essentially have three major cities we can really perform in, right? There's Islamabad, there's Lahore, and Karachi. Those are the three that you could possibly really do stuff in. And in India, you have something like, 28 cities like that, metros, where you've got educated audiences, you've got colleges, universities, people with disposable income who love entertainment, who love music. So just it's an entirely different scale of engagement, because let's say I was to do a show in Lahore, it would be very hard for me to keep on doing consistently shows in Lahore every month, because people would stop coming after a while, because it wouldn't be a something they'd look forward to. It'd be like, oh, it's on again. But so I have to space it out. I cannot perform um, more than, like, once in 3 or 4 months max. And so you have to sort of like rotate that, like you do something in Lahore and then people in Karachi hear about it, then you go there. But now you can't play there again for another 3 month period, or at least a 3 to 4 month period, right? And then you take it to Islamabad and then you can't play there. You can't like come in and do it again a month after. And this is, by the way, I'm talking not about shows that are that are done by corporate interests. I'm talking about your own shows. Shows you set up yourself, you sell the tickets for, you book the venue, you do the sound, the production, the backdrops, all of that. All of that is a lot of work, right? And so you need to space it. And in a country like India, you have a lot more event companies, A, but you also have a lot more sort of like spaces to play in. So potentially you could be a Delhi artist and you could end up playing in Delhi maybe in January and not have to worry about playing there again till maybe June. Or whereas in Pakistan, if you play here in January, earliest you can play is maybe, April, you know, and then you've only got really three major cities that you can look at. Whereas there you've got 28, 24, 28 cities. That's just the difference is huge.
It comes back to what you're talking about, that we're losing that, tradition completely, right? And that's what you're, yeah.
Because we've gotten used to these corporatized shows over the last 2 decades. It's like all the shows are essentially food festivals in Pakistan. They're not music concerts. And essentially what we're seeing is that it's just these brands which are sort of like, it's really they're doing it for advertising. They're not doing it because they love music. And so what we're seeing is that there's these festivals, but they're really food festivals. And it's always the same people who are appearing again and again. And those are your most commercial artists. Whereas in India, you have all kinds of festivals and you have such a breadth of performers. Like, if you go down to like the Jodhpur Riff Festival, that's got a completely different kind of lineup. And if you go to an NH7 festival, completely different kind of lineup, you know, but still massive crowds for both kinds of things. So one thing would be like the folk oriented thing festival. Other thing, the Sampurna festival in Ahmedabad, which is 7 days of just classical music, also packed. So the diversity of taste is way bigger over there, simply because they keep investing back into it. And this is the problem with Pakistan, that we're not investing in anything. We're just taking whatever the corporate sector gives us and saying, "Oh, this is great." Of course, it's great. Like, you don't have to spend a rupee on it. But the problem is that then it gets skewed. After a while, you kind of notice the same people again and again, the same styles again and again. It gets very sterile and very generic quite quickly. The diversity gone.
Yeah, I feel like also, there's a tendency to put this pressure on artists and like musicians, and like we should get the government to do something, right? Or we should get like artists to do something to like create a culture around music or art or something like that. And I feel like it becomes like a self-defeating thing, because like it's also a societal question, right? The question of
I think
culture.
that you kind of like hit a key point there, which is uh, a society which doesn't value expression and which only values material advertising is always not going to care about what people, artists, want to say. They only care about what makes them feel good. There's an entirely different set of values there, right? So therefore, if all you're interested in is quick fixes and quick solutions and this makes me feel good because it projects Pakistan in a very glamorous or a positive light. I'm not against that, but I am worried about the fact that if we don't invest in people who are not doing overtly commercial music, and if we fail to distinguish between quality and commercial entertainment, if we lose that distinction, which we have, then you're not going to be producing any kind of art. You're just going to be producing advertisements. And that's what I feel is wrong with the current landscape.
Like I remember like
Been like that for a while.
when I was in like Denton, Texas, one of our anthro professors, took us to this area in Dallas, right? And there were these empty warehouses, and that's how the punk scene started, right? There was these empty warehouses because like, the industrial jobs and factories were going away. And, like there was a culture that built around that, right? And that's how like punk music and that whole scene started. Like these guys would gather in these spaces and those things. And I feel like it's also a question of place, right? And, like how, society also must defend music, and things like that. And
that's exactly what's happening in Pakistan. There is no such sympathy. It's just that I will see whatever pops up on my smartphone or whatever comes on YouTube.
I personally feel like weddings are like the only space where we like do dances or something like that. But there aren't places where people are just jamming on the street or like,
No.
like you don't see any roadside, people playing music or anything of that
I
nature.
mean, there's local variants of that. Like, if you go to a darbar or a shrine, you'll see some Qawwali thing there. But it's normally they're there because they're getting people to come and give them some food or some money. But there's no state narrative towards performing arts. It's been like that for years and years. And it just getting worse because it's not like the government doesn't, by the way, have funding for this. They do. But by the time that funding reaches the institutions that are supposed to be doing these things, it's gone because it's either gone in corruption or it's gone into the pockets of officials who don't really want to spend it on the things they're supposed to spend on. A really good indicator is the fact that there's so many festivals happening all over the world, and Pakistan has representation on almost none of them. You do not see Pakistani artists on them. What you do see is Desi promoters, Pakistani promoters calling in the most obvious popular people because they want to sell tickets the quickest, right? So it's all driven by money and it's all driven by material greed. It's not driven by a concern for actually presenting authentic Pakistani art across the spectrum. It's just this very small pop fringe that is sought after by the promoters because the promoters want to make money and the artists who are working with them also want to make money. So what happens to all the art and all the music that is not driven by purely commercial concerns? It just dies, right? Because now you've got no representation.
I feel like for so long, like ever since I've known you and began interviewing you, like back in the day, the 2010s, like you've always, like given these warning bells that we're losing this, like
We've
tradition.
lost it now.
We've lost it. We've lost
We've
it.
lost it. Yeah.
You also used to say that many of these artists are going to just leave the country, and
That's also
and
happened.
that's also happened. And I look at like Zabe, she's in New York,
Yeah.
a major part of the year, and I think like other people.
Ali Sethi is in New York. Aruj Aftab is in New York. So many people. When I go to Canada, I start getting calls from Pakistani musicians saying, "Hey, is there anything we can do? Like, what's Canada like? Do you think we should come out here? Because we are really worried. There's nothing happening here." Because the model that has become the norm is that you have singers who basically have bands in which people can be replaced at any given point, right? I think one really notable thing, one thing that I feel about someone like me, which is I'm probably the last or the only musician left who has like name recognition or some kind of recognition, and I'm not a singer.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but you're very unique in that sense. Like I think like you never went down that route where you wanted to become like a vocalist or any you know, like that type of thing. I think even from the underground bands, a lot of the lead singers ended up becoming huge actors or popular figures. And I think like you've always been about the craft, and that's something I've always.
Yes. I mean, that points to the desperation and the lack of commitment, that it's all about money. It's like, what'll get me on TV for the longest amount of time? And if it's not TV, what's going to get me the most social media followers? And it's all done in this fake kind of really bizarre way where I find it very distasteful. Like, I have no problems doing a podcast with you, but a lot of these guys, like, you ask them to do a podcast and they just want money. Like, I heard of some actress who wanted like 2 million rupees to do someone's podcast. And the guy was like, well, if I could pay you 2 million, I wouldn't be doing podcasts, would I?
Yeah, yeah. I think like these for me, it's about like, you know, getting back to what you're talking about, just archiving and making sure that there's a record of like meaningful conversations, you know,
Yeah.
around these subjects. And I think like so like for me, like the social media thing is also very interesting. I wonder how you see listening to music, you know, as a you know, like a practice. Like, you know, how has that changed? Because before we had albums, right? And albums were supposed to be like, they're like novels, they're like books, they're like films,
Exactly.
right? And there's a whole story being told. There's a whole like, you know, like it was something you could say like, this is my album, and you know. But now it's like you release a single, and you know everything is like, you know, instant gratification culture and those things. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that social media is really a sort of a cancer of it's a cancer in the sense, in the worst sense, because it actually appeals only to your basest instinct, meaning that if something is not gonna titillate your brain in the first 3 seconds, you're just gonna scroll past it, right? And so it's almost like you have so many options now that you don't really know where to focus. And not only that, I think it kind of like is, I don't know if I have proof. I don't have proof of this, but with young people, I see them constantly on their phones. They cannot put them down, right? Because it's all this thing of self gratification that, oh, someone's liked my post and they've shared it,
There's been a lot of
right?
research and documentaries on this subject, you know, like just like sort of documenting. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I find that
Not good.
it's not, it's, I mean, there's depression associated, but it's also that, you know, like, because when I got into music, like as a teenager, it was this specific time and space where I started going to shows. You know, I started like trying to like notice, okay, this guy's using the guitar here, this is the bass, this is the drum. You know, trying to
Right.
hear parts of the song, and you know, and then that would take me back to, okay, like now I'm going to listen to like 70s rock. Then I'm going to listen to folk music. I'm going to listen to the Dylan period, you know, like, and, you know, it just like became a journey. Like, that's how I also got into Nusrat, actually.
You're a music fan because you are actually bothered enough to actually identify genres, to know what instruments are being played, way more than most of the people who are liking these posts or making these comments. Most of them are entertainment fans, and I think intelligent people have to make the distinction that here's someone who will actually read a book, and here's someone who's just going to sort of like, not even bother and just Google something and say, oh, I know about this. But there is a difference between the level of awareness that you bring to it and also the level of enjoyment that you have. Like, I still love listening to records. I do not really listen to singles, but I know I'm not the majority. I'm very much the minority. If I was to turn around my phone, you would see there's actual vinyl records here. There's a record player here. You can look at the audio system in my room. So I'm very, I guess I'm old fashioned, but I think there's a real danger with social media, and I think it's going to go away, by the way, because when we were kids, man, we would engage with people. Even now, when I'm talking to people or I'm with friends, that is a far better experience for me than just sitting there by my phone. Even
Even
if
our
someone's liking
even
something I
even
said.
even our concept of dating and finding relationships has been mediated by social media and those things.
Yeah. You know why there are so many of these dating apps? Because people aren't really dating. They're just hooking up. They're not really dating, right? And that's why there's so many of these dating apps. Can you imagine? Like, I mean, like now you have the entire world at your disposal. You can just swipe right or left or whatever.
Yeah, it's changing our
Already
whole
forming a
idea of
relationship.
relationships. It's changing our whole idea of relationships in a way. And yeah, I want to also just talk about the studio. Like your studio was such a cornerstone of Pakistani music. Some of the greatest albums were recorded there. And I remember when hearing the news, I was at Ohio State doing my PhD and I was just like so depressed. I was like, like I wish I had been there, show solidarity and those things. How have you bounced back from that? What took place? It must have been a huge, because you essentially, like, you were at Berkeley School of Music, I think, and then you came back and built this studio, and it was, outside of, I think, for a long time, Waves, and there were a couple of other studios in Lahore and Pakistan, but this was, like
Yeah,
the
it's like
studio where quality work was happening and the first state of the art. And I want to know how you bounce back from that and just a little bit about that situation.
well, I don't know if you really bounce back from such a situation because essentially I lost 23 years worth of work and recordings and archives and man, everything, microphones, vintage equipment, processors, reverb units, monitors, you name it, man. Preamps, all analog stuff, stuff that I can't even buy anymore. Like, I can't buy those machines anymore. There's no real bouncing back from it. My friends were really supportive. So many people like reached out to me because that space was more than just a recording facility. Many people made so many, friendships and associations there, formed their bands there, had hit records, hit songs. Right. It was part of the culture at that point. Like we're talking mid 90s onwards, all the way till like, 2000, whatever. Um, so it had been like part of the sonic landscape for so long. And so many people got their start there and had most of their most successful periods while they had been working there. Just the timing of it and the people that they would run into, like it was a whole ecosystem that was built around that studio. And kind of like when it burnt up, that all kind of went. And so, anyways, people really helped, man. We set up my friend set up a GoFundMe campaign for me. People contributed there. Friends, really helped me out and offered so much support, financial and moral and emotional. Like, I mean, everybody was like, it's bad, but like, you got to get through it. But I wouldn't wish it on anybody to go through something like that. But things happen, I mean, accidents happen. Life is very uncertain. I think what happens is that you have to kind of like decide, okay, how do I kind of like move on from this, right? So, but I can totally see that if I didn't have the kind of supportive family and friends that I've been blessed to have, it could have totally destroyed me. I mean, I'm still traumatized by it. I can't lie to you and say that, I'm okay. It's just a traumatic thing that happens in your life. And man, for like almost like a year or so after that, I would wake up and smell things burning, and nothing was burning. It was just my trauma levels were so high that I could just and just relentless anxiety and fear and wow, I don't know how I got through it. I really don't know how I got through it.
Yeah, that space was, yeah, it's like I want to say something, encouraging and positive. but all I can, give is a lot of love and solidarity. I think like you bounced
Thank you.
back, and
Yeah, yeah.
I think like, there's like a way you're gonna, I think through your music, I'm really excited about your, this phase. I want to talk about your father a bit, and your parents a bit, like their encouragement towards your music. And, your father passed away. He was a huge columnist and,
Yeah.
music savant. Like I remember his columns and stuff. And what was his influence on your life and that type of thing?
Well, quite simply, I would never have been a musician if it hadn't been for my dad, because every good record I've ever heard has come through him. And just like so supportive, my mother as well, but in particular my dad, because he was like a huge music fan. And just like, absolute support all the way through. It's just they knew I loved this thing, and they just supported me whichever way they could. Like especially, sending me to music school when they knew that this thing really doesn't have a glowing future. It's a huge risk. Then setting up my studio for me so I'd have a place to work at. I mean, that is not normal. Like I say, I've been really blessed. I was doing an interview with someone the other day, and I said to them, like, there's no way I could have done any of this without their support. And I think that kind of holds true for anybody who's in music, especially if their family is not behind them or they're not supporting them. It can be very, very difficult. So I fully sympathize with people whose families don't support them, because I know what they're going through, or I can imagine what they're going through. But at the same time, they saw that this boy had a dream, and like he was willing to sort of like work on it, and they supported that. Because it's another thing, right? If you have some kind of talent or you have some kind of desire to do something, but you don't have the opportunity to do it. And in a larger way, I kind of feel that about Pakistan as well, that, there's so many people who have the desire and the willingness to do something, and they're not afforded opportunities. And so this is kind of why I wanted to open up my studio to all these traditional artists, because I was like, let me at least share the space that I have and get them good quality recordings, get them good collaborations with international artists who they would never be able to access or meet or get to know, but who I know, and I can sort of like get these guys to sort of like do something together. And now actually share my biggest challenge is actually putting this stuff out in a way where I have enough support to bring it to people's attention. I did a bunch of media interviews promoting Revayat and the work we were doing. But really, it would be excellent to sort of like actually house this kind of project with a university or with something like a museum or something, so that at least it's archived there and they can sort of like showcase it, that if you want to hear Pakistani folk, here's a really good representation of it, and not from like ages ago, this is what's happening in this decade you know with the Aga Khan we're doing right now, we're planning out this Nusrat tribute tour, and we're planning to take it to 3 cities in Canada and then I think 5 cities in America. But that is an ongoing thing. They don't, I mean, I don't know if they have like an archive base as such. They should, but I haven't really spoken about doing Revite with them. We really sort of like worked on this Nusrat idea. So that's what I've been doing with them. But yeah, I'm open to any suggestions that you or anybody else may have, because you're sitting in the US. If there's a music department there and they're interested, I would be more than happy to share everything with them. Because I'm not doing this to make money. I just want it to be in good hands so that when I'm not here, that stuff doesn't die with me. It's there for people to hear.
We're seeing that with the Radio Pakistan work, right? From the 50s and 60s, all those artists who were associated with them, the
Yeah,
classical, and then yeah, no, that's a huge question. I mean, how will things be archived? And
exactly. That's what my concern is. It's not that I'm not doing this to make pop hits. I'm doing this to enshrine and capture a moment in time where this stuff was happening. But I need to place it with someone who knows how to preserve it and also how to bring it to people's attention. I'm not a marketeer. I'm just a musician who's concerned about the music ecosystem I'm in.
That shouldn't be your duty in this whole like
Yeah, I
game,
mean, I've
right?
done the groundwork, which is capturing it, recording it, editing it, mixing it, filming it, all of that. But it needs to be in the hands of an institution which sort of like is invested in preserving traditional art. And I'm not sure who to go to. I'm sure I'll find someone, but I want it to be on a platform where a lot of people can just enjoy the stuff and appreciate what we captured. And then, if they really love the performers, they can contact them and get them to come down and perform for them. That's
Yeah,
what the whole intention
absolutely.
is.
I'll definitely like circulate that round.
You do, yeah. Anybody, like, it could be, I mean, it could be New York State University, it could be Columbia, anybody who has a healthy interest in preserving this.
My university system here is going through some transformations as well.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It's a little bit brutal out here too. They're also going through that Pakistan phase, I guess you could say.
Right, right. I mean, it's brutal everywhere, but like at the same time, if someone's done the grunt work and they've laid the groundwork, and all you have to do is say, okay, we are going to sort of like take up this material and we're going to house it and showcase it, then, I mean, they really don't have to do much. Everything's already edited, done, titled, labeled, it's all shot. And so that's one of my intents to
I wanted to ask
share it
about the
with.
documentary. I think that's like a different space that you're engaging with, right? Is the documentary like what's the status of the documentary and what's your plan with the documentary? Can you tell a bit about that?
Sure. So the documentary feature was really supposed to accompany, it was supposed to be the precursor to the performance itself. So it was supposed to be like a 23, 22-minute feature about how we came up with the idea of doing the tribute, the impact that Night Song and Nusrat had on Pakistanis and on international musicians. And then we basically come out and play the entire record. That was the initial idea. Since then, the people there wanted to add on their side of the story. So they wanted to interview Michael Brook. They wanted to sort of like ask the Canadian musicians who had been involved with the performances, their views on the music that they had played. So they wanted to add on a bit to it. And that's where it's sparked at right now. In of itself, it's already done. In fact, I'll share it with you. In of itself, but I haven't released it because I'm waiting for them to sort of like decide what they want to exactly do with it. In the eventuality that they don't do anything with it, I can still release it. But yeah, it took a significant amount of time and research to do it for them. And I did it with the intent that, they would sort of like pick it up and house it. And this would become the project with the visual thing and then the performance itself, which would be shot and recorded. So that was my idea. So far, the feature itself is ready. It's just a matter of kind of like, them deciding when they want to sort of like proceed with it.
Oh, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I'm really excited about that documentary. But how was the experience for you, like having produced and music and composed and those things to do something like that? You know?
To be honest, like the people who I asked to help me put it together were really the directors of the thing, and that was my friend Luke Azariah, who works with Flux Media with Zan Pirzada.
Yeah.
Luke and Zan were the ones who shot it. Who Luke did pretty much directed it. I was more like I produced it, meaning that I funded it, and then I spoke a bit about my experience with Nusrat's music and how this whole thing came together. But I was very much a sort of character in the doc. I wasn't so much behind the scenes in terms of the editing and what goes where. It was all Luke Azariah's thing. He's really the one who was responsible for it. There's another documentary feature that I was also involved with way before, which was on Ataullah Isa and his music. And yeah, there's that too. So I should actually share these with you. The problem with me is I'll come up with stuff, I'll go about doing it, I'll do it, and then I won't know how to put it out because marketing and that stuff is not really sort of like a core strength of me.
That's I was speaking to a couple of poets who wrote some amazing books and stuff like that, and they were also speaking about that whole distribution aspect.
Yeah, yeah, because it's an
like
entirely different beast.
yeah,
It's an
and
entirely different thing.
it makes total sense. And like they were saying, like they're publishing houses, they're production houses, they're all these things, but
Yeah, yeah. Which is again why I thought that the Aga Khan Museum or something like the Smithsonian or something like Asia Society, I mean, any one of these organizations would be a better partner to help realize that goal because they're not for profit, right? They're not there to make money. They're there for the education and basically exposing people to good art from around the world. So I just thought that would be the better fit. But each organization has its own sort of like agendas and their own sort of like list of priorities. So it's not necessarily something that you spent 3 years working on is number one on their list. You know,
what is it, ethnomusicology, it's like anthropology and music, and like
yeah,
all these like very like you know research oriented sort of music fields, like they know how to like curate, preserve, and like do all this like in a very proper way. And I think it's all very interesting. I don't want to keep you too long, I guess. Yeah. And yeah, any last words? I mean, this has been a great interview for me and the podcast, and my goal is just to get stories like these out and do my part in catering to more of a broader audience. I feel like a lot of things are very Pakistan centric coming from where we are, like, and we get into this like echo chamber type world where like so people in India, like even in the US, they get to like hear about your journey and the things you're doing.
yeah. No, man, I mean, thank you for the opportunity to speak about these things. And I'm really hoping that we can bring out the tribute Nusrat concert to the States and I can get to see you and have you there at the show. But other than
Depends
that,
how
let
long I
me,
stay out here.
yeah, just send me a message on WhatsApp and let me start sharing like the link to the documentary and the audio from the show, so you can kind of like hear what it's going to sound like, and hopefully I'll be able to
I'll
release some of
also
the
put it in the description of the video, so they'll make like for a good like added resource for people who are watching the interview. I'll thank you for taking out your time to share these insights. From Nusrat Tribute Tour to the Revayat project, the Aga Khan Museum collaboration, the documentary, and the future of MHB, it's clear that this phase of your career is shaping up to be a very defining one. And I'm really excited to see your work as it progresses. For those watching, if you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Organic Filaments Network for more deep dives into music, culture, and artistic reinvention. Until next time, this is Sher Ali Khan.